Hi, this is Chaplain William Johnson from the Spiritual Care Department here with our Monday morning meditation. It is a great opportunity for us to take a moment and pause to thank all of our very diligent and very creative caregivers who are dedicated to the patients and our hospital community. We want to thank you for all that you do and all that you offer in service to those who are in need, whether it be families, the patients, those of the staff, all the things that you do to make Christian Hospital what it is. Thank you to the administration for allowing us this platform to be able to share words of inspiration and encouragement here at the hospital and beyond. I'm grateful for the privilege of sharing these messages with you, and I hope that they are enriching and help you in some way as you go through the course of your day and the course of your week. So, to our Monday morning meditation today, and it is entitled The Way It Is, or better yet, The Way It Is. We wanted to put it in a form of a question because I think it's important to ask very challenging and pointed questions of the realities in which we now face. I remember hearing a song way back in 1992. Seems like forever ago, maybe 30 years ago almost, 29 years ago. And a songwriter and very talented and gifted musician, Bruce Hornsby and The Range, offered these words in song. He offered these words entitled The Way It Is. That's the name of the song. And these words, I think, stood out to me. I was so enraptured by the piano solo that for years I missed the lyrics. Standing in line, marking time, waiting for the welfare dime, 'cause they can't buy a job. The man in the silk suit hurries by and he catches the poor old lady's eyes. Just for fun, he says, get a job. The chorus says, that's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. But he also gives us hope and says, but don't you believe them? It's a magnificent song. I wish I had time to go through all the lyrics, but I would invite you to just pick it up if you got a chance to listen to the song again. Bruce Hornsby and The Range, entitled The Way It Is. What I found in that song, though, is something that in my training as a minister and as a theologian in studying philosophy, this understanding of what we call an Hegelian dialectic. An Hegelian dialectic is this concept that you have a proposition, something that you believe to be true, what we call a thesis. And that thesis is also balanced by something that is an equally opposing contradiction to it that believes it is also true, which you call an antithesis. Thesis, antithesis, and somewhere in the middle of those two things comes a higher level of thinking and believing, which we call synthesis. Well, I'm fascinated by the concept of an Hegelian dialectic because there are things that say that this is right and this is wrong. This is good and this is bad. This is up and this is down. This is left and this is right. And somewhere in between, we find the truth. It is important to be able to kind of in our minds, kind of wrap our heads around this Hegelian dialectic. And I also like to support this understanding through a little bit of scripture. So the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew offers us these words as Jesus has finished having his Sermon on the Mount, and he's also talking and teaching those who are around them, especially his disciples. And he's talking to them about what I would call, you've heard it said, but I say. You've heard it said, but I say. In other words, this individual, Jesus the Christ, believed to be the Son of God by those who purport to the Christian faith would say that God says, you've heard people talking about these things. That's the way it is. But I say there's something more. And I want to offer these words of encouragement to us because in this reading of the scripture, I want to offer these words and then offer some things I think will be helpful for us, if you bear with me. It says in the 43rd verse, these things are important. Jesus says, as he continues his speech and his lecture or sermon, you have heard the law that says, love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is that for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much, he says. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Well, I love this message because I think it's important to know that as we look around and have a panoramic view, if we were, to look really hard, the world seems to be in shambles, trouble on every hand, difficulties everywhere, and it seems that everyone seems to be resigned to the conditions that we face. It's a struggle to find people who are not burdened down with apathy and just simply accepting things as they are. Maybe they're not saying it's just the way it is, but maybe the new colloquialism, not so new now, that says it is what it is the same sentiment that you hear from Bruce Hornsby in 1992, or from those great philosophers and others like Hegel, who offered this idea that if you have something that you think that's what it is, and there's a contradictory idea in saying it's not, somewhere we have to wrestle with things enough to be able to come to a conclusion that how we can get beyond things. The recent unrest in the Middle East and those things that are happening even in our very own country, dare I say our very own state and city and hamlet, or even our own homes or among our own families, so often leave us with these kinds of feelings that we are on opposite sides, never to find solution to the challenges that we face. But I want to encourage you today that there is a third way. Another way of thinking of things, as Hegel would call it, a synthesis, if you will, a way to take what it is that we believe and the contradictory ideas that push up against those things that we think should happen. In other words, there are places when we know how things have been, we know how things are, but we ought to be striving to do things the way they ought to be. Yeah, that's important because apathy and the burden of running up against challenges often cause us to leave hope aside, leave the promise of a better tomorrow to someone else, or to leave the conditions of our own existence to some other future other than our own. And I want to engage you and share with you that I believe that God and and all that we do in creation has called us to be in a place to believe in a third way, another way of seeing life, and to make that a daily practice in our lives. There's his side, there's her side, and then there's the truth, some say. There's one side, there's the other side, and then there's the truth. And I believe God resides in the truth. Well, what do you mean? How do you suggest, Chaplain Johnson, that we move beyond this place and to move to a place where we can actually find strength to have or create a new reality for ourselves? Well, I am glad that you asked that question because I think there is something there. We want and need a different way of life, I think. And in order to do that, we want a life, first of all, that is not marked by greed, but by giving. A life marked by not by greed, but by giving. Where we see when we look around, and that song kind of shares it, but everyone seems to be clamoring to get as much as they can for themselves and those around them without regard of how others are making it or moving along in their lives. It is a context or a kind of culture that says, I got mine, you better get yours. Or, in fact, I hope you don't get yours so that I can get mine. And whenever it is a tension between me surviving or me having more of a life that I want, then I'm not really concerned about yours. As we have gone through this pandemic, we have experienced that firsthand. We have seen people act out of character, it seems, but to look after their own survival or their own desires, their own choices, even if it damages and hurts and wounds others. The truth is, that's not the way, nor is it the only way. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be, that's just the way it is. And as Bruce Hornsby reminds us, oh, but don't you believe them? There is a different way of engaging life. And you move from the place of being greedy to try to get as much as you can for yourself and to a place, a posture of giving as much to others to bless their lives. And it doesn't cost much to give. I know it seems like it's foolishness and antithetical to the way that we think. But I want to remind you that the more that you give, the more comes back to you. If you give joy, joy comes back. If you give grace, grace comes back. If you give love, love comes back. If you give a smile, smiles come back. Try it. You'll discover that it is the law that God puts in all creation that when you give, you get more back. The trees shed their leaves, dropping seedlings all around in order to grow up new trees, new flowers, new buds in spring. And so it is with us. We don't really lose when we give, we really gain. Yeah. And I'm not talking about giving resources or money, but I'm talking the giving of ourselves, our lives to something. Many people hold things in reserve, never to give away, hoping that and complaining about not receiving enough. Well, the more you give, when I was growing up in church, the choir used to sing, the more God gives to you, just keep on giving, because it's really true. You can't beat God giving no matter how you try. And because God has given to you, you should give to others. A culture, a life that is not marked by greed, but by giving. But also, this new life that we hope to have should be a life not marked by gravity, but by growth. I'll say that again. A life marked by gravity, but by growth. Sir Isaac Newton actually discovered that what goes up must come down. And so it is that we assume that everything draws us down instead of allowing us to grow up. But I want to encourage you to try. As Jesus would say, you've heard it said that everything that goes up must come down. But as we do know, that in our lives, some things, if you really give it away, or if you really offer and want it to grow, it has the ability not to contract, but to expand. Our hearts are like that. I've seen time and time again throughout the hospital, people of goodwill who have given love and care, especially our caregivers, to patients and families, to discover that as they do that, it gets contagious. Something happens when you are willing to grow. Some people are afraid of growth. Growth changes things. It changes power structures. It changes who's in charge. It changes the way we share responsibility. It changes so many things. But growth is always good because that's the way God designed it, for everything to have the possibility to grow. Because if you're not growing, someone once said, then you're more than likely dying. Thirdly, I want to hurry on. Sometimes I feel like I'm in the parish ministry and preaching sermons to congregations, and I apologize. Here it is the last point I want to make. that this new life we should have that is different than the way it just is, but the one we want to see is a life that is not marked by greed, but by giving, and not marked by gravity, but by growth, but also not marked by grudges, but by grace. You know, grace is that thing that allows us to look beyond what someone deserves and give them what it is that gratitude that we already have for who we are calls for. Many of us have received grace in our lives. If we got what we deserved, we would be in a very bad place, but we don't. We don't always get it. Sometimes we want what we deserve. Some of us who feel deprived, feel like things are unjust, that life is not fair. We want what we deserve. We have earned it. But on the opposite side, we've also discovered that while we are stacking up and taking a catalog or an inventory of all the things that we didn't get that we should have gotten, that we thought we deserved, there are also a whole load of things that we probably should have gotten on the negative side of things that we didn't get either. Just think about it. When I make my way to work, if you've never been one to drive a little bit over the speed limit to speed, when you see someone else on the road, you might not have grace. But if you know that you have driven a little bit over the speed limit and wow, you didn't get in an accident and you didn't get hurt and you didn't get a ticket and you didn't get in trouble, but you see someone else on the side of the road, it makes you think about, wow, that could have been me. Dare I say, any of the things that are tragic in the world, that things that are happening where people, by some hook or crook or some disaster, a plane crash, or those who are in the flood zone, or those who have suffered from a random act of violence and to lose a loved one, or for sickness, or for those who have contracted and found themselves with COVID-19 and they've worn masks or not worn masks or been vaccinated or not been vaccinated, it's easy for us sometimes to forget that we too have been blessed with grace. Grudges, however, push us to the place where we assume that people deserve the worst of things. And when people have done us wrong, when people have not necessarily been kind to us, when they get what they deserve, sometimes we want to fold our arms and say, yep, that's exactly what they deserve. However, we should be praying for grace, for covering, for mercy, for unmerited favor, that in which people receive not because they worked for it, but because God is just good. In the scripture, Jesus reminds them that the rain and the sun shines and the rain falls on the just and the unjust. Doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter who you are, that we all receive life, whether we deserve to wake up today or not, we are here. So why don't we use it and not resign ourselves that that's just the way it is, but to resign ourselves that I won't believe that the way things are is the way it always has to be. That I can live a life full of love, with laughter, leaving a legacy for those who shall come after me. I pray that this message has blessed you today, and I pray that you're encouraged by all that you face. And if in moments when you find yourselves resigned to apathy and saying, well, that's just the way it is, they're always going to be that way, things are never going to change, remind yourself that you can change because you've decided to live a life of giving, a life of growth, and a life of grace. And by doing so, you change the atmosphere and the climate, if nowhere else, but in your own heart and in your own mind. Have a great day. Thank you so much for giving us this time. And as always, to our loving, patient caregivers and to our patients and your families, we want you to know that you are loved, you are appreciated, and you are irreplaceable. Have a great week. Thank you so much.